Last week, the National Women's Soccer League was rocked by a report from The Athletic's Meg Linehan, in which two players accused North Carolina Courage coach Paul Riley of sexual coercion. Riley has since been fired, but the story continues. Many current and former pro players have come out in support of Sinead Farrelly and Mount Ashim. Players forced the NWSL to halt games over the weekend, and the commissioner, Lisa Baird, has since resigned. Lots to get into in this story and more to talk about. And we're joined by Haley Rosen, CEO and founder of Just Women's Sports, and former NWSL keeper for the Seattle Reign and Orlando Pride, Haley Kopmeyer. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Kop, let's start with you. What was your initial reaction to the story when it broke?
I mean, it's horrifying. I don't think there's really many other words to describe what an awful, situation those women were put in, and just truly just a heartbreaking story it is. I think that, it's hard to put into words any other feelings other than just at first, just complete sadness and anger, really.
No, I would agree. And me reading this story, it was surprising and not surprising all at once. So Haley, as a former player yourself and founder of Just Women's Sports, you work with a lot of former athletes in the NWSL. So what was your just initial reaction when you saw what was going on?
I mean, I think exactly what you and Haley are saying. First off, it's a total gut punch. That was a heavy day at Just Women's Sports, and we rounded up as a team. And I think as much as we weren't surprised, it still sort of shakes you. It shakes you to your core, and it's shocking, even though it's not. And, we talked a lot about how, you know exactly how this happened. You just do. And you see it. Unfortunately, it's not just the NWSL. It's in college. It's at the youth level. I mean, it's a really major problem, and it's systematic, and it touches way too many people. And, I think in some ways, though, it's a reminder of why we're here. We talk a lot at Just Women's Sports about hype, not guilt, and, let's get these women paid. Let's cover them. They're amazing athletes. We talk about all the positive sides of it. The other side of it is, without journalism holding these entities accountable, this shit can happen, right? And so we need people. We need people like Meg. We need organizations like Just Women's Sports, holding these institutions accountable. And, that's a really big reason why we're here.
Yeah, the NWSL and any sports league for that matter are just simply not incentivized to investigate themselves. Kop, you played for 7 years as a keeper until 2019. The story mentions allegations of toxic environments fostered by other coaches throughout the league. Do you feel like this is an issue that extends farther than we've seen so far? And how is this able to continue for so long?
I think sadly the NWSL was set up to foster this sort of environment. And I think that's kind of the sad truth of, there's low wages, there's no guarantees in your contracts, you're fully dependent on these organizations to make less than minimum wage. And there's constantly this, belief fed into you that you should be happy to be here and you should keep your mouth shut and put your head down and work and do what the coaches tell you, do what your owners tell you, do whatever you can to make it happy, because there's no guarantees. I think it starts there, right? The first year in the league, I had an $8,000 contract and it was taken from me in the middle of the season. It was just in a meeting. That's how it works. And I think that sort of that if that's your structure, that fosters situations like this very sadly to occur.
It's interesting you say that, and because media plays a big part in everything. We see right now with the minor leagues in baseball, the conversation is being brought up that these are not livable wages. These are not good livable situations. And had the media maybe been making more light of, like you said, the NWSL is set up for that. Had the media maybe been making more light of it, maybe some of these things can be prevented. But Haley, I'm curious, how have you felt about the response of the media to this story now that everything's coming out, knowing kind of to what Kop said, that this was bound to happen with the way things are set up? How do you feel the media's response to this was?
I mean, I think the media has been all over this, which is, it's a good thing, right? We need attention. We need to bring light to this. We have to talk about it, root it out, and move forward. That is, I think, an issue, though, in women's sports. We see that the media shows up when there's scandal. You know, when the March Madness thing happened, media showed up. They loved it. It drove clicks. It was, interesting headlines. Like, women's sports needs coverage year round for so many reasons, but this is one of them, right? Like, if there's eyes on this space, if there's eyes on the coaches and the teams and the leagues, this stuff won't happen, or it'll happen less, right? And so that, yes, show up now. Let's talk about it. Let's root it out and let's work towards change, but show up year round. And I mean, this is why we're Just Women's Sports. This is why we exist.
There have been a lot of social media statements from current and former players that are currently out there. Megan Rapinoe notably posted "Burn It All Down" in response to some of the details from this story. Have either of you spoken to players, and what are those conversations like? What are people thinking right now?
I think that's a great question, and yes, have spoken with some current players, some former players. I think first and foremost, there's just some grieving. It's a sad situation, and I think it's a lot to process. And I think there's players who have played. I know that have played for this coach, and maybe haven't experienced the same abuse, but can also, again, it's kind of that same idea of shocked, not shocked. And that side of it, I think, is really horrifying. And I think at this point, yes, burn it all down. At the end of the day, I think everybody still wants a league. But I think the structural change has to come. And I think that's what everybody wants. And they want the people that swept this under the rug to be held accountable. It is one thing to remove Elisa Baird and Elisa Levine and to fire Paul, but they aren't the only people who knew about this. And those people still have jobs. And I think that's something that players want. They want accountability in this.
It's interesting because accountability, it was the word for 2020. I remember that people kept on talking about it. We were talking about it when it came to policing in a civil manner. But accountability is a word, and I'm glad you brought it up, because when you talk about it, it needs to happen on every sector of every life. Even teachers need to be accountable. Like every coaches need to be accountable. Leagues need to be accountable. And to that point, there's no doubt that there's so much work that needs to be done. How does the league move forward to protect players better now that we know the problems, now that we know that there's still people there that might have known? How do we move forward from this? And let's just start with you, because I want to hear from both of you. And let's start with you. Like, what's the next step forward?
I mean, I think obviously going through with this investigation, having it done at the correct levels, removing the people who, were complicit in this. I think that's the first step. And then I think the second step is, currently the players are undergoing their very first CBA as a union.
And that's big.
Literally
that's big.
Happening.
Huge. Yeah.
That's huge. That is literally happening as we speak, like bargaining today for players' rights and job security. And they've used the statement, "We're taking our power back." Right? This league is about the players. It is not about the coaches. It is not about the front office. It's not even about, all of us who have gone into media. It is about them. And I think this CBA is so important. It's job security. It's financial security. It's freedom to be able to leave a situation if you feel unsafe. And it's also, believing that if you speak up about something, that your voice will be heard. And I think there's, 30 things on the table right now that this CBA is covering. And it is key that every single one of them go through, because it will root out so many of these problems.
Both of you have been talking about the structural issues of play. And I think that's important because, I think for people who maybe aren't checked into this story or just learning about it, they see, oh, well, the commissioner is a woman. Like, does that not fix the problem? The complaints about Mr. Riley were raised in 2015 through official channels. And you would imagine with what else is going on in the broader culture, the Me Too movement, that would be a open space for these allegations to come to the fore. And yet they did not. Why? Like, what? Is it simply because the NWSL is in this survival mode where, oh my God, any bad news, you got to think about what could happen to the league? And what is it that structurally that causes this to happen? Because I think that is important and something we need to continue to drill down on, because it's not just about representation in this particular space or any space.
I mean, I think like on the most basic level, I think you touch on it. I think the league is in survival mode, and this is the longest standing women's professional soccer league we've had in the US. And I think there's some decision making that's fear-based. And I think that as we go forward, we have to build with the players in mind. And there's a lot of decisions that are made, very few made with the interest of the players in mind. And I think that's got to be a shift in mindset. But I think 30-foot view here, this is not just the NWSL. Why does this stuff happen in, all over, right? You talked about the Me Too movement. This is structural from every aspect of our society. Why does this happen to women? Period. Why do we, and it's just it's very, the whole thing just hits home so hard, because I think, and not to make this about myself, but I feel like I saw it in youth, I saw it collegiate, I saw it professionally. Now I see it in work. You see it with being the only woman in the room, or with VCs, or, all of it. It's everywhere in our society, and it sucks. And we need to call it out, and we need to change it. And we need to change how we, work with women, view women in our culture.
It's very interesting you say that, because Jason knows what I'm about to say, because in our pre-production meeting, I literally said, being a woman, it's such an obstacle. If you want to get to the top of your profession, you're going to have so many obstacles. One, just the fact that you're a woman, that's an obstacle. But then as you're climbing the ladder, you're going to run into, oh, here's a guy, he's a little bit weird here. Oh, watch out for this situation. You go to a next one, you get to another platform, watch out for this person. Watch it. At every turn, whether it's an actress and it's trying to get casted for a role, to where if it's a professional athlete trying to live out their dream and be a professional athlete, at every level, you see women have to fight these obstacles just to do their job, just to be a woman in the workplace. So I always say, every woman knows a woman that has a story, and that's a problem to me. And so, I love that Just Women's Sports are here. So I wanted to say, Haley, what should listeners expect to hear, and where can they get more content covering women's sports at your outlet? Because to your point, the fact that you're saying Just Women's Sports, the name of it says everything.
Yeah, and listen, this is not about me or anything else besides these players right now and rooting this out and working towards change. But this really is, why I think platforms like Just Women's Sports are really important. And we're not the only ones doing this work. There's a lot of amazing journalists out there that are covering this space. And I think, as long as 4%, less than 4% of media attention is going to women's sports, there's going to be problems. And that's why we're here. That's why there's amazing journalists like Meg doing the hard work. And we're all going to keep pushing to make this a safer space for women. And, eventually, on the positive note, get these women paid so there can be more owners of teams and leagues and all of that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Shouts to WNBA Twitter and all the journalists out there that cover sports. It matters. They're Haley Rosen and Haley Kopmeyer of Just Women's Sports. Thank you for joining Takeline.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you both.